I think, Adam, we're going to correct all the way to a point where household median income matches the home price, the median home price. And so that is going to be worse than 2008. This could devolve a lot faster than last time. And so that could be interesting. But yes, worse.
Okay, and for prices to fall to match or come in historical alignment with median incomes, finger to the wind, what type of percentage decline is that from where we are right now?
It's going to be near your 50%, and much greater in certain areas.
Welcome to Thoughtful Money. I'm its founder and your host, Adam Taggart. Contagion has been the trend of the U.S. housing market this year as rising inventory and weakening prices have spread to more and more metros. How bad has it become? Well, Zillow just revealed that its data shows that 53% of all U.S. homes lost value over the past 12 months. That's the most since 2012. As we're now poised to enter into a new year, should we expect the situation to get better or worse in 2026? Well, to make sense of it all for us, we're fortunate to welcome housing analyst Melody Wright back to the program. Melody, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
I very much appreciate it, and you're doing me a real solid here. We're recording this over the weekend, right before Thanksgiving week. You've been on the road. I very much appreciate you making the time for the Thoughtful Money audience, but I already know you have a heart of gold, so it's not surprising, but it's still appreciated.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, look, I just mentioned that big stat, which is the one that really made me think to reach out to you this week, Melody, that Zillow, who is they try to be, I think, as impartial as they can be, but I think we know they've sort of been cheering on, the bull market in housing until recently. That they have admitted that, now the majority of U.S. homes have lost value over the past 12 months. I recall from our previous conversations this year, you were one of the first housing analysts to say that, or predict that 2025 will be the first year in a good while where national housing prices will actually decline on average over the year. First off, how is that prediction doing? I know we've got over half the houses have lost value, but are we actually on track for a national average housing price decline this year?
Yeah, so it's a little tricky. If you look at the National Association of Realtor series, I don't know that we'll get there, but I think we might get there in Case Shiller, which is that series looks at recorded sales. It's hard to say, but you can certainly see the deceleration happening in home prices. And where we'll also get there, Adam, of course, is on the new home side. So that will be very
Yeah.
clear. But the biggest problem, and one thing, and I'm not going to get too excited because last year in December, we really saw sales kind of rev up. And so I had hoped that would carry through 2025 so that more people would want to transact in the market. Instead, as rates kind of went up again, the market just froze. And then we had kind of the April tariff terror or whatever. I think people got really cold feet. And so sales slowed down again. And so we aren't having enough transactions to really influence that median home price in the NAR series because it's only those higher price homes that are transacting, like really
Hmm.
higher price. Like you can see year over year, the increases are always in the 1 million plus category or the 75,000 to 1 million. And so what you've got again is something we talk about all the time, the bifurcated housing market, but the majority of folks transacting are in those upper tiers. So your median is going to be higher. However, what I've been seeing over the last 3 months, and this is why, I get into the dirty, dirty details, is underneath the covers, that $100 to $250,000 sales price, we're starting to see incremental increases in sales in that category. And so as that continues, we'll start to drag the median down, and it's happening already. And that's what you're seeing, the deceleration. And so that's a very long answer that I think people are going to end the year sort of, it'll probably be around flat, slightly down. But as Zillow said, the values are down. It's just that we're not transacting, we're not selling them. And so we're not realizing those impacts.
Okay, and so what created this frozen, and we have a bifurcated market you mentioned, but we also have used the term frozen a lot, right? Because there are so few transactions on a relative basis. And really what caused that was we had abnormally low mortgage rates for many years. And then during the COVID era, we had a ton of stimulus and everybody was moving. And I now don't need to live in a city because it's going to be work from home forever and I can go
Right.
live wherever I want. So prices started zooming higher because of those two twin boost to demand, which is, hey, I got some extra money right now, and also I really want to get out and live in my dream area. So prices went bananas, and then inflation kicked in, and the Fed said, hey, we got to start constraining this. We're going to have to jack interest rates up. So people could see that coming, and so they locked in homes as quickly as they could before they were going to get quote unquote priced out by rising mortgage rates. Okay, so now we got to this point where now housing prices artificially elevated, mortgage rates super high on a relative basis. Those who own homes don't want to, in fact, in many cases, don't feel like they can transact, right? Because they're quote unquote trapped by their 2 or 3% mortgage. They're never going to get a deal that good if they sell their current home and go buy another one, right? Now, obviously, too, people got impacted by the higher cost of living and whatnot, and so people's ability to pay has gotten injured. At the same time, we've seen the cost of ownership skyrocket. So insurance, property taxes, maintenance, right? So this is all just basically the soup that's created this environment where based on historical basis, we've almost never had a percent of the population as large as it is right now who can't afford to buy the average home right now. So the only people who can transact are the wealthy, right? And that's
That's right.
why we've got fewer transactions, but they're much higher priced homes because it's only the wealthy that can participate here. So obviously this is not healthy at all. It obviously skews the data, right? So people will say, well, housing must be doing okay because home
Right.
prices are still hanging in there. But for all these reasons, it's really giving us a very misguided signal. So the question is, you and I have been talking about now for the better part of a year is, okay, well, what's going to solve this for us? Is it going to be lower mortgage rates, which I'm going to ask you about in a second? Or is it going to be just more transaction volume that starts to bring up more transactions at the lower end of the market, and that mathematically will bring the prices down? And then, of course, there's just the hey, maybe we just need lower prices here, which obviously I
Mhm.
think is the answer. I know you think
Mhm.
similarly too. But let's start there with the mortgage part. So 30-year fixed mortgages, they have come down a bit over the past year, but from about 7% at the high to about 6.2, 6.3, I think right now.
6.3 right now. Hmm.
Yeah, okay. So that doesn't seem to be enough to be unfreezing this market. Um, do you expect them to continue falling next year, especially as the Fed is, promising to or hinting it's going to keep cutting a bit more going into next year? Do you expect mortgage rates to get low enough to really provide any real relief here, or do they need to go down a lot more to be really material to the equation here?
Sure. Let me just add one other tract to where we are, and that is the amount of speculation, because a lot of it wasn't actually first time home buyers who were getting in on these low interest rates. It was actually the speculators. So when they thought, oh, I can work from anywhere, they would move to that place, buy their home, and also buy a second home. This happened a lot in Texas with all the tech influx there.
Mhm.
And so I just wanted to mention the speculation
Sure.
aspect as well.
And what's the worst of the speculation? Is it the person who bought another home as an investment home to be, a landlord in addition to their regular job? Was it the Airbnb speculator who said, I'm going to buy several of these things and become a passive cash flow millionaire? Or was it the institutions who we know who were buying in bigger percentages than they had in past boom cycles, who are hoovering up the single family home inventory?
All of the above,
All the
right?
above. Are they all equally guilty, or is there one that stands out more than the other?
So I think the institutionals were way guiltier like in 2012. But, and guilt is a relative term. And because the government asked them to come do that, Fannie and Freddie begged them to come in and buy these homes. We might even see the government have to buy some of them back when people start crying loud enough. And so I think they started really in 22 starting to sell. And if they didn't sell right into the market, what they did is sell to one another to try to sustain their prices. But
Right.
now they've become net sellers. And I think I mentioned to you, I met with one of the largest of those, a guy who heads the asset management department, one of the largest. Told me they are, as soon as leases are up, they're rehabbing and offloading them because they can see what's happening in a lot of these problematic locations. So I think it was more your folks who first they probably started off with a long-term rental, and then they walked into a bank, and the bank said, why do that? You should do short-term rental, because instead of $1,500 a month, you can get like $10,000 a month. Don't you want to do that? And by the way, why don't you buy 10? So I think we probably saw more of that. The Airbnb short-term rental is the biggest culprit at this point in time, but it's all cumulative, right? And then another track that we have to mention is, of course, and then I will promise get to mortgage rates, is that the government intervention here, because although it's mainly those really top tier people that are transacting, the ones that are transacting at a lower, it's not really lower because they're getting down payment assistance. They're
Right.
getting an FHA loan with 3.5% down, but they don't have to pay that 3.5% because there's a ton of down payment assistance programs around. And so they're sustaining those programs through the government. And so, but I think so. It's a really toxic brew. And then you also have the boomers, of course, who are holding these second homes. It's not like an immediate decision. Oh, I've got to sell this today. For a lot of them, they can take their time to sell it. So just wanted to add those 2 points, and then I can talk about mortgage rates. But if there's something you wanted to say to that.
I mean, we could talk an awful lot about this for a long time. No, I mean, I guess let me just say this on both the Airbnb side and the institutional side. Melody, you and I have been talking for several years now. Before this contagion that we're talking about started, and two of the things that we forecast about this sort of investor ownership in single family homes was that if and when this thing turned, you were going to get a bunch of these Johnny come lately landlords who got, you know, siren songed in or suckered in, however you want to
That's a
say
good way to put it.
into buying all these rental properties. They're all of a sudden, kind of at critical mass, going to be forced sellers to say, hey, wait a minute, look, this thing was supposed to put $10,000 a month in my pocket. I'm now losing $1,000 a month, thousands of dollars a month in cash flow. I get to unload this thing. Similarly with the institutions, buying up sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of properties in the same metro area.
Right.
This isn't the roof over their heads. This is somebody's Excel decision, right? And so if the Excel, they start realizing, what, this was supposed to be at the end of the day net green for us, but it's turning out to be net red, then screw it. Just dump them,
Mhm.
right? And
Right.
that can really result in a lot of inventory coming on in the market and downward selling pressure. Are we at that stage with either of those two parties yet?
I think we are at that stage in certain locations. We're at that stage in Atlanta. We're at that stage in San Antonio. We're at that stage in Tampa. And then for the Airbnbs, you're seeing it. And so what's fascinating, I track 85 cities, and that is a combination of your largest markets plus a lot of these really smaller short-term rental explosion markets. My sales are always higher than say, the national average, because
Mhm.
what we talked about at the beginning of the year is that we had seen motivated selling in 24, and this year motivation was going to turn to distress. And Adam, I mean, you are starting to see in those short-term rental markets sales up, and prices down. And so you are definitely seeing motivation. And then now we're looking at markets where sales are down and prices are down year over year. And that's happening in those short-term saturated short-term rental markets. So I believe that it already is happening, that the scale is just going to increase, and it's going to get I think the spring of 2026 is going to be very interesting because the other thing is on the FHA side, which we talked about, is those guardrails went in place on October 1. And I'm already seeing in client books that when people are getting their foreclosure notices, they're turning around and they're slashing prices and they're selling as quickly as possible. In addition to when I was at that conference, we heard of short sales exploding, meaning, they know they're underwater, but they've got to get out. Our national statistics just hide so much. You know, but when you're seeing these local areas this distress, and then that there are areas just like this across the country, the contagion's going to spread.
Okay. So you expect this, we'll talk about the housing market in totality before the end of all this, but this thing of sort of distressed investor sales, you're
Yes.
expecting that to get worse from here.
Oh, definitely. But
Oh,
it's
definitely. Okay.
definitely started, but it is going to get a lot worse.
Okay. All right. So it's already game on. All right. So mortgage rates here. So
Yes.
big question. Will they actually provide relief next year, or is it going to be more of the same? Sort of, this disappointment that they're just not coming down as fast as trapped homeowners want them to be.
Yeah, so I think as I'm going to say something really stupid, which is the bond market's very complicated, right? And I think that anybody who really thinks they know exactly what's happening, but I think what we do know are there are a lot of levers that Japan can pull, China can pull, if they come under stress. And we're seeing Japan kind of come under stress right now. There's also this big, short trade in the bond market that could unwind. And so there's a lot of things happening at once. But what I can tell you is that we have just been skating along at this four handle for a very long time. And it doesn't matter what the Fed does. Every time they cut, the bond market just ignores them or gives them the finger, whatever.
Mhm.
So I don't think unless you have a massive kind of drawdown that rates could get material lower here. And I think the Fed itself, I believe, I think it was one of the um, Fed boards came out with a study about they believe that buying MBS is what inflated the housing market. And so I just don't think that the Fed would do that again. But by the way, even if they did, it didn't help in 2009. And so I don't see rates getting to a point low enough to make a huge difference because you do have such a large percentage under that 4%. And so it would have to just hit the floor. But then, Adam, who's going to afford it? I mean, you can look at that. The Fed just came out with its summary of consumer expectations, and the mortgage refinance rejection rate was higher than I think it was like 42%, the highest that we've seen in the series. So people can't qualify with those student loans reporting now, with layoffs hitting the white collar sector. Even if rates got that low, you're going to find fewer and fewer people able to qualify. And we're starting to see underwater mortgages increase as well. So they're going to be stuck.
All right. So on that last point there, people's ability to qualify, um, what turbocharged the housing bubble 1.0 was the fact that all sorts of people who had no business getting mortgages were getting them. Um, I think, don't let me put words in your mouth, but I think in the everything bubble, which now includes housing bubble too, um, there has been a lot of that going on as well, and particularly on the government, the FHA loans and things like that. You're nodding vigorously as I'm saying all this. Um, are we at the point of the story here where the lenders, for perhaps a whole variety of reasons, both just weakness in the housing market, but also, we're starting to see the consumer struggle under other types of debts like student loans, which we've talked about, whether it's because of, some of the defaults we're now seeing in the private credit space, are the banks starting to become more conservative in terms of who they're willing to lend to, meaning they're tightening their credit standards? And is that another factor going on here, which is, hey, it doesn't even matter if you want to buy this house, you can't qualify for a loan to
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah, I think that's been happening for some time. You can see they're a big non-bank lender. They
Rocket
just put out a
mortgage. Yeah.
Rocket Mortgage announcement. They're getting into investor loans, debt service coverage ratio loans, which tells you where we are in the cycle because they've run out of the people they can get through FHA. They've so now, I mean, it happens the same it's so wild. But now they're going after the high quality investors, with those high credit scores and theoretically a lot of money in the bank. They think that's going to save them because they've run out of everybody else. The problem is they don't realize that a lot of those people that were getting those loans weren't actually qualified. They were just doing a lot of tricks. Like it's real easy to keep the same $10,000 in your bank account and pay it out every month and have it come back in, pretend to pay it out because we were doing things like bank statement loans already. And so there's just not going to be the appetite that the rockets of the world think there's going to be, but it is a sign of where we are in the cycle that they're now getting into something that everyone in mortgage promised they would never do again. And so we know where we are now.
Okay. So whenever I talk to you, Melody, I always feel like I get, yet another dimension of this situation that I didn't fully appreciate before. And the term that's in my mind right now is sort of perfect storm. We've got prices too high, we've got borrowing costs too high, we've got tightening credit standards, we've got distressed sellers in a lot of these areas that we just talked about. We've got record unaffordability. The younger generations just have pretty much given up hope of ever being able to buy. We've got the cost of home ownership have skyrocketed, which should be putting downward pricing pressure on prices anyways. I mean, I'm kind of losing track of all the arguments here for why housing may continue to suffer going forward from here. So, give me the headline here for 2026. I know in the past you've made a bold statement that you think that this housing downturn may actually be worse than the GFC. If that's still true, what's the soundbite here? If somebody said, Melody, where's this all going? What would you say?
Yeah, it's going to be worse because what happened last time was we were on our way down to where household median income would actually match home median prices. We never got there because Wall Street came in to buy those. But now they're crying on TV. I don't know if you've seen some of the clips, but there's been a big, large institutional out there saying, listen, we didn't want to do this, but Fannie and Freddie and FHA begged us to come in and buy these homes. And so you can already see the narrative that they're going to start crying a lot louder soon and say, "Hey, we saved you, government." And so, who's the buyer now? And I've talked on your show before that I think actually the government might become the buyer of last resort here, unfortunately, and then use certain affordability programs. But I think, Adam, we're going to correct all the way to a point where household median income matches the home price, the median home price. And so that is going to be worse than 2008. And I can't, you were saying many things, but I think you included property tax and insurance. But
I did.
yeah, what we just saw in Boston and Chicago is that, where these people were not, I'm sorry, these municipalities were not getting revenue anymore from commercial real estate. They had to go to their homeowners and increase property taxes, doubling many areas of Chicago. This just recently happened. And I think you're going to see more municipalities try to do something like that because they're all in a budget crunch. And so, yes, I think, and by the way, this is the other tricky thing is that in the last cycle, remember how many all cash buyers we've had, right? Well, when these aren't on a bank or non-banks balance sheets, there's nobody that's going to be cutting the grass. There's nobody that's going to be winterizing that home, taking care of the mold problem, which if you service a loan, you have to do all of that. And so I think we could see this kind of devolve into chaos a lot faster than we did last time, as many of the investors abandon these properties, which we're already starting to see. Like if you look at the FHA loan performance trends, and they have categories for why is this 90 plus delinquent? And one of those categories, some of them are unemployment, illness, things like that. But one of them is called no contact. And what that is when you cannot get in touch with that person. Now, prior to the GFC, that would have been a lot of people who were scared to call in and talk to their servicer because they were embarrassed about what was happening. And it would be your investors. Well, now it's a lot less because I read servicing notes all the time. It's a lot less. It's that it's investors that are walking away, and you're starting to see those numbers just they doubled. I think from last year, and so this could devolve a lot faster than last time, and so that could be interesting. But yes, worse.
Okay. And for prices to fall to match or come in historical alignment with median incomes, finger to the wind, what type of percentage decline is that from where we are right now?
It's going to be near your 50%, and much greater in certain areas. So, let's say, so probably about 38%, honestly, but, right. It's when you look at current median income.
Okay, so that's losing a limb. That's not a scratch to this
No,
market. Okay.
right. Right. Now
Um,
we could all get, wonderful high paying jobs soon, right? And to keep that from happening.
Sure.
Just kidding.
Well, no, we could look, trust my sister, I can take that argument over into the stock market as well, which is, hey, yeah, everything magically gets better if we have,
Right.
a resurgence in growth and real wages go up and all that stuff.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
I think you, like me, are looking at the
Current
landscape
trajectory.
and
Yeah.
saying, I'm just not seeing that, yeah,
Right.
that hero ride to the rescue anytime soon.
Right.
Um, all right, so you talked about the fact that the U.S. government might become the buyer of last resort here. Um, and we've seen some proposals being floated. Some might say creatively, some might say frantically, by Bill Pulte, who is the head of housing now under the Trump administration. One of the things that was tossed out there was the 50-year mortgage. I know you've gotten a ton of questions about that, and I'm sorry to have been one of them that pinged you for a
No,
second. I
it's
heard
good.
that. Um, uh, let's start there with that one. I get the sense from you, you think that's not that big. It's kind of, I don't want to say it's a nothing burger, but it's not something you're too worried about. Is that more because of its actual implementability, or just even if it's implemented, it's not going to make that big of a difference?
I think it's all of the above again. And just, I wanted to ignore it when I saw it, but people would not let me because I was just like, this is a nothing burger. One, because we already have 40-year modifications. So, and they've been using those for a couple of years in FHA. And I'm seeing people fail out of those because honestly, what happened there with the 40-year modification is you would go to try to modify that loan, but because your property taxes and insurance had gone up so much, your payment was actually higher. So, even extending the period out. And when you look at the amortization schedule, you're not saving that much every year, and the amount of interest that you're paying in is crazy. But also back to what you and I were just talking about, people aren't going to be able to qualify. They're just not in a position to qualify for these higher priced homes. And so I do think it's a nothing burger. If they instituted it, it would be terrible. I'll call that usury all day long.
Hmm.
In the first 11 years, you'd pay 253,000 in interest. You would have not only paid your home down by 5%. And so, by the way, 250,000 is what I think median home prices should be around, right?
Hmm.
So that's crazy talk, right? We've got to think of
Sorry, in
different
that
solutions.
example, what was the purchase price of the house if
Oh,
you're paying
400,000,
400,000?
400,000,
Okay.
400,000. I mean, post any down payment, but nobody puts 20% down anymore. I mean, that does, but yeah, I think it's a terrible idea, but just like, when they were going to do the Freddie second liens, I don't think that it would have that much impact, but it's still a form, in my opinion, of debt slavery. And,
Yeah.
but it's certainly not going to, to get us out of the doldrums.
Okay. So in your mind, it's kind of pushing on a string, meaning even if you offer it, most of the people who want to get it aren't going to be able to qualify for it
No,
anyways. And it
right.
won't make that big of a difference. And it just makes things worse from a societal standpoint. You create this generation of debt slaves who are, yeah, okay. All right. The other thing that's been floated recently has been portable mortgages. And I don't know if assumable mortgage, I think I've heard assumable in there as well. Um, I don't know for certain if that's assumable is being super pushed right now by the administration, but let's just talk about those real briefly. So if you either had the ability to take your mortgage with you when you sold house A to buy house B, um, How realistic is that? And then two, you and I don't know, a year or so ago, I kind of got real interested in assumable
I
mortgages for a
remember.
hot
Yeah.
minute. Do you see that as actually being potentially part of the solution here?
Well, it could have been, but it's like in practice what's happening. So I have a really good friend, Mark McDonough, who has an assumable mortgage company. He's been in the business for 30 years. And, he and I talk often, but I gave him a call after the last, brouhaha in the press.
Hmm.
And he's like, Melanie, they won't do them. The servicers won't do them. Like, we can't, like, he's sending complaints to the various DOJs because the servicers, they're just not set up to do them. They're
Hmm.
not incentivized really to do them. And so so you got to think the mortgage market is like the worst. It's like the DMV, but way worse. Okay. And it's built on 1968 technology. They cannot change. Any attempt to change it has failed miserably. And this is your big banks as well. And so they just can't structurally get it done or get it set up. Now, could they do it if there was enough sort of motivation, sure. But we're not seeing that from even this administration that's throwing them out there. The portable, I have to laugh. I mean, I'd be down with it because it would take the entire securitization machine down. I mean, you can't do that. I mean, you're lending that loan is a security in it's the collateral in a mortgage-backed security. And so, and that's tied to the home. So you can't, it's impossible. And so,
Because your
now,
collateral changes.
right, exactly. And so you'd have to buy it out of the pool for sure. And then of course you're not going to get the same term. I mean, it's not even to me that one is a non-starter. Now, I'm all for getting rid of the securitization machine. I'd be the first one to sign up. Then we can talk about some of these solutions, but that would be unraveling of the entire mortgage-backed security market.
Okay, so it sounds sort of like a almost an idealistic idea at this point in time, right? Which is like, hey, if we actually tried to implement this, it would break the whole system.
Yeah,
Okay.
spaghetti at the wall
Okay.
is yeah.
Let me just ask you this. So, somebody said to me, which made sense to me, which is, hey, no, this would kind of, ruin the banking system because the banks are making these loans essentially betting that you're going to sell your home within 7 years or
7 years,
right?
100%. Yeah,
So if these were assumable or portable, well, then they'd be much more long-lived, and that would blow up all the banks' models. Now, I don't know if that's, I mean, I get that. I don't know if that's super true because talking to you, you tell me, hey, these banks make these loans and then they just flip it right away to somebody else. But of
to the
course, that
government.
somebody else is still assuming that
Right.
the life of that loan is only going to be a certain amount, right? And they generally flip it to the government, from what you've been telling me.
100%. Yeah. So yeah, so then of course rates would have to be higher. I mean, so these are to me these are just things that are being thrown out to make it seem like we are talking about solutions. And at every turn there's going to be a bad guy. Oh, it's the servicers, they won't do the assumable. Oh, it's the banking industry, they won't do the portable. But none of these are viable solutions at the moment.
Okay. So again, don't expect, just like you're not expecting lower mortgage rates to ride the rescue anytime soon. You're not expecting some bold, government policy to come here and all of a sudden unlock a lot of affordability for folks.
What you can see, they recently passed through committee, and I think is a lot of these housing affordability initiatives that are more like assistance at certain adjusted gross income. And so I think that's the plan. Is it's going to be a lot of housing affordability nonprofits out there similar to what you see in Rochester, buy the block, where investors can come in, buy up the block, rehab, put lipstick on a pig, and resell it. That's their plan right now. And so what I would probably imagine is that when the builders get in trouble, because they're gonna, is that and also the institutionals, that if the government doesn't buy up these homes, or through its asset manager BlackRock decide to buy up the homes, um, that they would have these programs where it'd be like, okay, if you make $50,000 a year, then you're eligible because that's a certain percentage less than the median income, then you're eligible for certain type of assistance. I see more of that coming than anything else.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Um, when an asset price bubble has been blown, particularly in an area that is, deemed essential to the economy, and especially when the government has had a hand in blowing that bubble, um, the the operating procedure becomes extend and pretend, right?
Mm.
We just do everything we can to just try to keep prices where they are, right? And instead of stepping back and saying, whoa, we deformed natural price activity here. We should just let all the froth get out of this thing, get down to a sustainable baseline, take our lumps, but then we'll be better. The playbook is always the reverse. What can we do? What can we possibly imagine to try to keep prices where they are here? So we're talking about a bunch of ideas that may not work, but to your point, there's probably going to be a lot of additional spaghetti they're going to throw at this wall. In the big picture, when we're having this conversation, say 5 years from now, Melody, what do you think will win out at the end of the day? Will it be the natural corrective market forces? Or will it be the forces of extend and pretend? Or will it be a detente, maybe 50% one side, 50% the other? So we get a half correction, but not a full correction.
5 years from now, and just remember, we've been extending and pretending since 2020. So we're in year 5 right now,
Well, I mean, I could say we started extending and pretending back in the early 2000s. We had a little blip in
Fair
the
enough.
GFC, and then we
Yep. Yep.
continued it. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. That is fair enough in this cycle. So 5 years from now, the silver tsunami is going to be pretty much, I think all of us are talking about. It's going to be everything we're talking about in government. It's going to be everything we're talking about in housing. And so I think the natural forces will win out unless there's natural disasters that, destroy all the homes. Like we are just going to have way too much inventory. And so I think 5 years from now, that there's not really going to be anything that's going to stop the train. Now, could there be areas that do way better than others? Sure. Like I
Sure.
think Tennessee is going to be a state people come to for a long time.
That's because everybody wants to live near Melody, right? Yeah, no,
No,
that
no,
part.
it's the taxes. I've had several people on X after the whole Chicago thing. They're like, "Is there a hobby farm?" Like I said, I'll do a special on this area, but yeah, I think the market forces will win. But of course, I mean, there's so much that could happen, Adam, between now and then. Like we could go to war, that could change things a lot. So, but still, I don't know how you get around kind of the supply issue that's coming. And then also, if we don't fix the job situation, the demand.
Okay. So there's an old saying, when you have imbalances that reality bats last, right? That you can you can do everything you can to try to distort everything, but at the end of the day, ultimately, reality generally steps in on its own terms. And what I'm hearing from you is you think we are far enough in this baseball game here that reality's last bat is coming. I'm not saying it's
Mhm.
necessarily next year, but you feel like that is when the dust settles here, that's going to be what it's going to be those natural forces that win out.
Absolutely.
You, you,
Until
you
some,
and I
go
aren't going
ahead.
to be talking about, you know, uh, great housing bubble 3.0 in 5 years.
For a moment there after the BBB was passed, and I was like, well, maybe we'll have a little blip up. I don't believe that anymore. I think we're at a place structurally that is just so bad that market forces will win out.
Okay. All right. Um, you mentioned this a couple of times. I know we've talked about this once or twice, but I want to just flip it here. So when you said silver tsunami, I think everybody understood that, but just for those that might not have, that is the aging of the baby boomer cohort. And Melody and I have been talking about this for a long, long time. That eventually we're going to hit a point where instead of 10,000 boomers hitting retirement age every day, 10,000 are going to be moving into the nursing home or moving into the cemetery as they age out. And last time we talked, Melody, you sort of shocked me by saying, I think that's actually started. It's now no longer academic. We are at the in the first inning of that, if you will. Now, this is going to be, as you said, like a 20 plus year
Right.
event that's only going to build steam from here on. So, okay, so that's going to be no matter what happens otherwise with the housing market, that's going to be adding more and more inventory. as people are having to leave their homes for one reason or another, right? And in most cases, when a boomer or an aging parent passes their home along to children, if they have them, if they've got multiple children, most of the time that house gets sold because the kids can't
Right.
determine who should take the home. So let's
Right.
just sell it. Let's split the proceeds.
Right.
So, okay. So tsunami of inventory coming onto the market for years and years and years after that, right? So let's combine that with some of the things that you just mentioned. Cost of home ownership has really skyrocketed. Um, People are struggling to afford the homes that they live in. Investors are looking to get out and dump these properties on the market. So I think probably about a year ago or so we were talking, and I pulled a stat that said, I think it was the average age of a home in the US had just passed 40 years, right? So these wooden boxes that we all live in are aging, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, as people get more economically distressed, obviously they can afford to do less maintenance.
That's
You
right.
you then have these, institutions that are saying, all right, look, I'm planning on selling this thing, so I'm going to defer as much maintenance as I can and just dump it on whoever's going to buy
Mm-hmm.
this thing.
Right.
You've got a bunch of boomers who are like, look, I'm old and concerned about my money's going to healthcare or whatever at this point. I'm
Right.
not going out there and paying
Right.
someone to do this. I'm certainly not going out and fixing the gutters
Right.
myself. I can't at age
Right.
87 or whatever, right? What are your thoughts on just like the quality of the condition of our national housing fleet? Is that a
Yeah.
concern to add to the table here?
Well, I think so, but it's a concern for those home prices because and that's what we're seeing right now. This is why you've got the rage delisting, as my friend John Brooks says. It's like the boomers will list it, and when they don't get an offer at their price or they get some ridiculous offer, they like delist the home in rage, and they've done no repairs to the home, and so I think that this becomes a real drag on home prices as well. And what you are seeing is you're getting a lot more realistic appraisals now. When you're in these manias, like you can sort of justify an appraisal that's coming in hot because you can see all around you that home prices are accelerating. And
Right.
so,
And really square
yeah,
footage dominates everything else, right?
yeah,
Hey, you've got this plot, you can do anything you want with it, and it's hot. Everybody wants,
the plot, the
a
land.
plot in this area, right?
Yeah,
Once
exactly.
that mania starts to cool off, you really look at the quality of that square footage, right?
You sure do. And things can be found that weren't found even when you sold it. I've shared that example a couple of times here. And so, yeah, I think you have an issue with home prices. Now, some people have tried to argue, well, we're going to need to replace all these homes but we have built so much new supply. And now some of that's pretty crappy too. I just think these are factors, but they're not going to change the trajectory. But if they're in this case, the fact that people haven't done, and what also happens, a lot of investors bought in 21, 22, and then couldn't afford to rehab that home. And that's what I see a lot in Johnson City, Tennessee. They're just sitting vacant, not rehabbed. And so I think the trajectory is that's actually going to pull down home prices even more.
Okay, yeah. All right. So back to my kind of perfect storm comment earlier, right? Like this is just yet another headwind that we're throwing into that tempest, right?
Exactly.
All right. Wow, we're really making people feel really
I
optimistic
know.
about the housing market.
I know.
Okay, so a couple other quick things that have made headlines. Trying to figure out which way to start with this one. I guess I'll take this trajectory. So I just saw a headline that said the median age of all home buyers, including first time and repeat buyers. So this is the whole soup, has hit an all-time high of 59 years per the NAR.
Hmm.
Right. So this isn't some Melody Wright out there in her little
Right.
corner of the internet saying this. This is the NAR admitting that. That blows my mind. The median home buyer is 60
Hmm.
at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Well,
part of that goes back to the affluent can buy and affluence is correlated with age. But I mean, that societally, what does that say?
right.
How concerned does that make you?
Very.
Yeah.
Very concerned. I mean, it's very this. So it's funny. I got asked on a segment, do you think this is worthy of a national emergency? And in my mind, I say no in terms of government involvement. But as a society, this is a national emergency that people need to wake up and realize that if we don't address this problem, because I think you and I talked about this briefly in another show, the younger generations are much more comfortable with violence than the older generations. And I think, we've seen escalated violence. And as a society, if our younger Americans don't have hope, then all kinds of ugly things are going to happen.
Um, all right, so let's take this into a direction that maybe folks aren't expecting, but we were talking about this before we turned the camera on. So one of the things that is making home ownership more expensive is the cost of electricity. And
Mm-hmm.
that cost is getting pushed higher and higher in a lot of areas because of the craze to build data centers to power AI, right? And data centers are oftentimes sort of sold to a community as this, hey, this is going to create some jobs.
Jobs, like
Yeah,
five. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. So the
Right.
few in the community who can go build the data center, great. They get
Right.
some work for some period of time. Everybody
Right.
else gets stuck with permanently higher electricity bills.
Right.
Um, I actually put out, this is a couple months ago, but I put out an idea on X where I said, man, has anybody put in a poly market bet yet for when the first data center is going to get burned down by, angry
I'm
residents?
sorry. I don't mean to laugh,
I
but
know. But I find it funny, gallows humor wise, because I actually think that's probably going to happen at
oh
some
yeah,
point. Like I think that's a
for sure.
pretty safe bet to make that at some point here,
Mhm.
locals are going to get so angry they're just going to get some bats and take it out, and some gasoline and take it out. And I'm certainly not advocating this, folks, but what are your thoughts about that and this trend here? I mean, it just seems like if you are I don't want to say a homeowner because renters definitely are getting hit from this too. But if you're a struggling home dweller, the hits just keep on coming, it seems.
That's right. And what's interesting too, Adam, is when I drove, and I still drive, right, all across the country, you can see a lot of new empty data centers. I shared that on X Twitter, and people challenged me. I actually briefly worked for a company where I was building a data center directory. So I'm very familiar with what these things look like, how they operate, and you could tell there were a lot of new construction completed. And why? Well, the dirt around it, but also the for sale or for lease sign. And what happened right after I did that tweet? We hear that there are data centers that are fully built but can't come online because they don't have the electricity. One of them was an Amazon data center. And so I think we've already overbuilt in this area, similar to the way we've overbuilt in housing, but nobody knows it yet. But to your point, the other thing I've seen all over the country are signs that say no to data centers. And these they may have a Trump sign in their yard, they may have a Biden sign, but they have a no to data center sign. And so I think that the country is united in the fact that they don't want these centers, they don't want the increased power costs, they don't want their water being sucked dry. And again, I must remind people that when these people come to town and make these promises to you, they hardly ever happen. Let's take Micron up in New York right now. This is a reason all those investors went into the Northeast, like Rochester and surrounding towns, and bought up all these homes. So they thought Micron would bring all these jobs. We're now looking at a 3-year delay, and so it's a lot of promises and no delivery. And so I do think, on the one hand, we've got a data center mania that we've probably already built for. But on the other hand, I totally agree with you. People understand that this is why their electricity bills are going up. And there will come a point when the baseball bats come out.
And this is kind of interesting too. I spend most of my time on this channel these days, Melody, talking to, financial analysts about uh, the AI boom and just how sustainable it is from a whole bunch of dimensions, right? From obviously a stock valuation dimension, but from a capex, can we just continue to keep throwing this much money in at the pace that we're doing it in? And obviously, part of that is dependent upon having the power to fuel these data centers. This could be a constraint in the system that is underappreciated here, which is this sort of,
Absolutely.
you know, aggressive NIMBYism, where people are just saying, "Look, I don't want it here, or it's here, and I'm fed up with it, and we're taking it offline," right?
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so, it does seem that when people are doing their calculations of how high AI can go, and a lot of people are arguing, "Hey, it can still go a lot higher," there are potential risks like this or constraints like this that aren't in their formulas.
Absolutely. And it just feels like hardly anyone's paying attention because the mania is just so, I mean, all we see are, everyday pictures of the administration with some tech bro or a big dinner where they're, and, oh, yay, another open AI investment. Wait, whoops, Oracle, or,
Mhm.
all the round tripping and the, different. So we're in an absolute mania, Adam, that I believe once it's all said and done, it's going to be very mechanical Turk like where we realize, and for those that don't know that, it was in the 1800s, a robot was built to play chess, and he would go on exhibitions all across the world. But in reality, there was someone in the robot's
There was a
playing
small
chess.
man inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what I've seen in fintech as well. Just yesterday, another company came out and said, you thought you were talking to a chat bot. You were actually talking to a room full of 700 Indians. And I think that's a lot of this technology, actually. Now, I'm sure in places like OpenAI and these, the tech ivory towers or whatever, that they're trying to do real technology, but you've got several AI critics out there, very well known, saying we've reached the limit of what LLMs can do. And I firmly believe that. And I feel like we reached that in 2022, Adam. And so I think what happened from there is narrative just took hold, and it was the train that everybody got on right after SVB, in the last hopium of this cycle. But when all's said and done, I think this we are in pure mania. No one's really thinking this through. But what's interesting to me, and just the reading I've done, is that the people are against this. You've got mom groups out there, advocating to get this off phones, to get it, to get phones out of schools and things like that. And I think we might see a counter sort of insurgency of the people who are like, you guys can put this in the news all day long, but none of us want it. So go
All
pound
right.
sand.
So to the person who's watching this, who's saying, Melody, come on, stay in your lane. You're a housing analyst, right? What do you know about AI? First, I just want to let folks know that you've actually trained large language models, so you
Yes.
actually know of which you speak. But just not to get rat holed on people saying, look, does Melody,
Well, we will.
should we trust her as much in AI as we should on housing? Um, let's just assume for a moment that you are right. Okay.
Hmm.
Or let me just put it this way. Let's just assume that the bloom comes off the AI rose for one reason or another. Um, Hard to imagine that a repricing of the AI stocks wouldn't send shockwaves through the stock market because those stocks make up such a huge percentage of the market value of the overall markets, and they're in almost every ETF, and this would cause Mike Green's passive capital flow with the giant mindless robot to start flowing in reverse, right? So it is really hard to expect that that could happen without a pretty large negative wealth effect on that affluent class that owns financial assets, right? So
Hmm.
that would be yet another, probably not just material, but probably pretty serious additional headwind to throw into our tempest soup, correct? Of our perfect
100%.
storm.
And it's the only reason we stayed frozen this year is that mania for
Is
housing.
because that
Yeah,
affluent cohort has been
absolutely.
doing so well.
And they've been doing so well. They've seen their returns. They are able to rage delist, right? If they weren't seeing such great returns in the stock market, they would be much more incentivized to get that home listed and sold because they would be needing that cash. And so, and it wouldn't be just this, hey, why am I paying this so much for electricity, house cleaning, all this stuff? I don't even go there. And I'm talking about their second home. It would actually be, hey, I need the cash. And so yes, if the bubble, even it doesn't even have to pop fully. I think it just has to deflate. Then that's also going to add to our perfect storm.
So, it's interesting, and you don't have to share this opinion, but like, I can't think of a time when so much of the world's future, at least economically, revolved around a single company. Um, so, right now everything is revolving around the AI sector, right? But there is one supreme company in that sector, which is NVIDIA, right? And sort of,
Who replaced
okay,
Enron on the
yeah,
S&P? Yeah.
well, yeah, but I don't even think the world knew it revolved around
Oh,
Enron.
no,
Yeah,
exactly.
I think
Yeah.
Enron was just the Jenga piece that people didn't
Right.
realize was as destabilizing. But like, I think the world really realizes that, hey, so as goes NVIDIA, as goes the AI space, as goes the AI space, so goes the financial markets, as go the financial markets, so goes the house, right? I mean, just everything is around this. And I mention this just because folks, I have no idea. Markets will probably eventually have their Santa Claus rally and end the year, stronger than they are right now. But we just had a potentially really meaningful moment in the markets. I'm sure you watched the big reversal we saw, but NVIDIA came out. The markets have been weakening. We've been seeing increasing concerns about the AI space creeping into the media, mainstream media headlines. And everybody was really hoping that NVIDIA could do its usual job of announcing just complete blockbuster earnings results and a great forecast and kind of jumpstart this market back into rally mode. And that still could happen from here, folks. I'm not saying it won't, but what we saw instead was the market have its knee jerk. Yep, this is great. Stock was up 5%. When the markets opened the next day, NVIDIA was up like almost 6. The S&P and the NASDAQ were green. But then throughout the day, gravity took over and Nvidia ended up closing down over 3%. And it was a moment that a lot of analysts who had been sort of skeptical or eyed the AI trade with skepticism had told me, you want to look for the moment where Nvidia does everything the world expects it to do, and yet it doesn't continue that
Right.
upward spark in
Right.
hopium, right?
Right.
I can't say for sure that that's the moment. It probably isn't, but we're going to be watching it really closely. But I just, to your point about how much the housing market depends upon what goes on in the financial market and how so much of that depends on the AI trade and
Right.
how much of that depends on one company, I just wanted to connect all those dots for folks because we are potentially more vulnerable than we realize with everything so hyper dependent upon one entity.
100%. And so I agree with you just seeing that happen during the day. And then also, those of us who look deep, looking at their inventories climbing, also Burry talking about
Right. That there
the
are
way
some
they're
real reasons to have concerns. Yeah.
there are real reasons, but they're real reasons that no real reasons have really mattered, Adam, because I think there's been real reasons for a long
Yeah.
time.
But they never
And
do in a mania, as you know, right?
exactly,
And,
but
and
to
that's
your
what's important
point,
about the turning point is when
exactly,
the reasons start to
exactly.
matter. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's exactly right. That's what it is. It looks as if the reasons are going to start to matter. And you can see even when we kind of had that relief rally, it couldn't get there. And so I think that moment was very important. And like you, Adam, I've watched these markets for too long, and I know how the just how powerful that impetus of the Santa rally is, so that everybody can kind of end positive and get their bonus and all of that. But something feels different, Adam, and it feels as if we've just had some narrative busting across the spectrum and all in the everything bubble. Every single big asset class has kind of had a large chink in its armor. And so I think this is a very interesting time where we could actually sort of see a reversal here, like a real, I don't know, a real downdraft, I guess, in the
Yeah.
market.
Well, so I talked about in the intro that Contagion was the theme of this year. That's when everything starts to get infected with change, right? And then what happens when change arrives? You get trend reversal. So trend reversal may
Mhm.
be the big theme of 2026. I don't want to get too far over my skis on this, but certainly you seem to think
Sure,
that
me
that's going to be
neither.
the case in
Yeah,
housing, but
yeah.
it could be even more than that. All right, let me, if I can, try to squeeze one more topic in here, which is so this is connecting the trends of sort of the aging of the population and home buyers, but also with Peter Atwater's behavioral economics, which is, generally summed up, desperate people behave desperately,
Mm,
right? So people are always at the individual level going to try to find solutions to the problems they face if the problems aren't getting cleared by natural market forces or by the government or whatever, right? And so I just want to put up this picture. I'm sure you have seen it in the media of late, Melody. But this is an addition that was added to a single family home in Greenbrier, Virginia, where the inhabitants of the house, the residents of the house, wanted to make it a multifamily dwelling. And I don't really know how they got this passed through their local zoning boards, but apparently they did. But they built what I think the neighborhood sort of considers a monstrosity. Um, and I understand how this would be functionally very useful for the family living there. It's probably, I think most people would say this is going to be a total eyesore for the neighborhood and probably bring down property values as a result. But let me put it this way. I understand the impetus behind what they did here, right? That's a desperate person responding desperately to the situation they're in. Hey, my folks are old. They can't afford to live alone at this point in time. I've got kids that I'm guessing, probably aren't being successful in launching here. So we got to find a way to try to affordably, keep a roof over our families' heads, right? What does this tell you about the state of the market? What do you take from all this?
I mean, it's I saw a lot of things that look like that in Colony Ridge in Houston, Texas, which is a large immigrant camp. What it says to me, Adam, is desperation. It's just absolute desperation. People are desperate, and they're trying any kind of solution.
Do
And
you
and
expect to see more of solutions like this going forward?
Oh, I think so. If it hasn't already happened, by the time we see real trends, they've already happened, and so I think a lot of people have gotten really creative, and I think that's the other thing we've talked about on your show before. There's a very large functioning private market that none of us really have any insight into, and the private note market where I think they get financing from private credit to do things like this. And so I think already people have started to try and get just as a lot of seller financing, things like that. That's what happened in Colony Ridge, for instance. And that's where the seller gives you the financing. And so I think that, yeah, I think a lot of this is already happening all over the country, but it is pure desperation.
Um, d- do you ex do you expect a growing wave of, I don't know what to call it, shantyism, that might spread across communities as people, um, you know, it's harder for them to afford the homes they have, but they don't want to leave. And so it's this kind of like, I'm just going to do like the bare minimum to try to stay in this place that I'm in, and I'm going to do things that maybe aesthetically I would never do in a normal market. But I've got to have more people live in this house than currently live here because they're either family or I need the income or whatever. And it kind of starts to look like that image I just showed there, where it's this sort of Frankensteinian do-it-yourself minimum viable product, solution to this unaffordability crisis. Whether you're again buying a home or maybe forget that, you're just trying to stay in your home.
Yeah, I think we will, and I think I already have. And RVs parked next to homes. I mean, down in Florida, there's a whole rental RV market where people are renting out RVs, their RVs to like strangers. So my point is, and they're doing things like pad splits down in Florida where like 8 people are buying home. I mean, I think that this is already happening, and I think
Wait, pad
driving
split. Wait,
like
you take a home pad and you subdivide it so you've got multiple different structures and
or
families living on the same pad.
Well, not structures per se, not there. In Colony Ridge, you do have that, but in Florida, it's basically 8 people sharing this house, and they all have a section of it as theirs. This is going to be a nightmare for mortgage companies.
Right.
I
So it's
can't.
like what would
Yeah,
be one home has like a divider. So it's
yeah,
this is my
yeah,
half or quarter and
yeah.
yeah.
This is
Okay.
my room or my space, and yeah, and these are big down in Florida right now. So I think it's just that the national media is not interested. If the national media would get in the car with me right now, I think I could show you all of this is already happening. And but they're just not interested, and so I think people would be shocked if they drove across this country at what they would see.
Well, it's super interesting. And look, I'm realizing this conversation. I myself am one of these people who, took I guess, more drastic action than I maybe thought I would have a couple of years ago. Because as everybody watching this, I think, knows by now, I moved states this year, moved from California to Nevada, and um, I guess that's both a sign of the boiling pot that we're all in. That even for me, it got to a point where I said, look, it's too painful to be in this one place. I'm going to move to another. But maybe there's also sort of a silver lining on that too. And look, I understand those sort of desperate measures that people were taking. I don't know if I am a fan of too many of them, but I get it. But there is agency in the story, which is what I'm saying, right? Which is you can, whether it's through multi-generational living, whether it's through changing the state in which you live, whether it's, changing the type of structure that you're in, or maybe right now it might be choosing to rent and just
Mhm.
let time work in your favor over the next couple of years. So, while I think for very valid reasons, we've given people a lot of reasons to worry here. It's not all terrible, and at the individual level, there are ways to reduce your vulnerability to what might go on here, and maybe even ways to position yourself so that when the dust does settle and that natural market forces have played out, you might be in the catbird seat to get a
Mhm.
really good sort of forever property at a good value.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's, when I saw this path, and people are always like, well, you said, well, no, I've been talking about the path. That's when I moved to Tennessee. That's when I completely changed my life. And I moved my mom in with me, which was just something I couldn't even contemplate a year before that. Okay. And it has had massive benefits in many ways for me personally, but also it's setting me up in a position where I can act when we start to see these things finally play out. And so I think there is good news here. If you want to, if you're willing to make certain sacrifices, and really more than that, just reevaluate your position on some things. Like you reevaluated what is California doing for me? You knew all the reasons why you were there, but like and I think you've also found there it can be great to live somewhere else. And so I think there is hope here. I know that I'm seen as a doomer, but in reality, what I'm seeing is that at the end of this road, our younger Americans are going to be able to participate in this housing market again, and we will flush the speculation out of it, and housing will become so boring, nobody will want to talk about it.
Yeah, which is what it was, I think, up until about the mid 90s, right? When that whole sort of securitization uh, ecosystem that you were talking about earlier got put into place, right?
Yeah, it started the home prices started coming up as the women entered the workforce, and you had more divorces and household formation, but it wasn't until the late '80s and into the '90s when people really started using housing as a way to jumpstart the economy at scale, and it was more investor participation than really your regular Joe and Jane.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, if there's something that our generation could leave to the ones that come after us, I would love it if that included, a boring housing market. It's just there are certain things that shouldn't be, in my opinion, um, uh, over financialized, and you know, I'm probably getting in trouble here. People are going to say, "Oh, Adam's a total socialist." It's not that at all. Um, but it's sort of like I get in these fights with people or people get into these disagreements with me on X about. I do think, at least in certain situations, there should be limits on investor ownership of single-family homes because it's a national asset, right? It's in the best interests of the economy for our younger generations to be able to form families, right? It's the basis of our whole society. And when we monkey around with the system and deform it and price them out, yeah, some wealthy speculators benefit, but that's much to society's degradation. And so, anyways,
Well,
I'm
no, but
sure.
it's like I just want to say quickly, it's not private actors in our securitization market. These securitization markets are being driven majority by our government sponsored enterprises.
Well,
And so
absolutely.
if we just like got government out of the securitization markets, we would be doing a whole bunch better. Or also, we could have them lower the loan limits to actually be reflective of median income. Right now, they're market based. And when I say the loan limit, in case people don't understand, Like there's a certain limit as to what you can get from one of these FHA or GSC loans, and they publish that every year. And it's absolutely ridiculous and completely unmoored from the median income. But if we just did that one thing alone, we would change things so significantly. So I do think there are solutions that even would you wouldn't even have to do something like forbid institutional ownership, but maybe that is a temporary measure we need to entertain. But honestly, I believe that if people just let it go from this point forward and the government stepped back just a tad, we would have true market forces went out.
Well, I sing it, sister, sing it, sister, and let's include in that too, the Federal Reserve,
Oh yeah.
maybe getting out of the game of setting interest rates and letting, the market actually do that. But, a huge part of this problem, in addition to the government involvement in the lending markets, has been, ZIRP, right, as a
Right.
policy, and plus buying trillions in mortgage-backed securities, right?
A real toxic brew.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, look, as we wrap this up, Melody, thank you. It is always just a fascinating, eye-opening experience to talk with you about the housing market. Thank you. Um, Two last questions. One, is there anything else that's burning brightly on your radar that I just haven't thought to ask you about yet?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot.
Okay. Oh, thank you. You've given us well over an hour here, so I very much appreciate you sharing your time here. All right. And then secondly, and most importantly, for folks that have enjoyed this discussion and would like to follow you and your work in between now and the next time you come on this channel, where should they go?
Sure. You can find me on X Twitter at M3_Melody, on Substack at M3 Melody Substack. And I encourage folks to even just sign up for the free version because I put a lot of information in there. And then M3 Melody YouTube as well.
All right, fantastic. And as usual, Melody, when I edit this, I will put up your handles to all those on the screen so folks know exactly where to go. Folks, the handles will be in the description below this video so you can get there with one click too. All right, well, look, folks, please join me in thanking Melody for giving us so much of her time and expertise today. Please show that by hitting the like button and then clicking the subscribe button below, as well as that little bell icon right next to it. I'll make this brief, but housing for many people is the most important financial decision that they're going to make in their lifetime. Even if it isn't, it's probably still quite a large factor in your overall net worth. If you have questions that you're wrestling with about the housing market, do I maybe, at least as Melody often mentions, hey, if you own a home right now and you think you might want to sell it or move at some point in time, list your house, just see what you can get for
Right.
it right now in this market. I know, Melody, I'm putting words in your mouth here, but I think I've talked to you long enough about this.
Mhm.
You think time works in their favor for the home buyers here, so don't feel a lot of pressure to buy right now. But there are a lot of things you can do to try to find good deals out there in the market. If you're a seller, time may be working against you here. So again, knowing what you can list your house for now might be a good factor in helping you determine whether to pull the trigger or not. But anyways, long story short, if you want help thinking through all of those things and how the financial implications may affect the rest of your personal wealth, if you don't have a good financial advisor to advise you through all that, feel free to talk to the ones that Thoughtful Money endorses. These are the firms you see with me on this channel week in and week out. So to schedule a free discussion with those firms, just fill out the very short form at thoughtfulmoney.com. Firms will be in touch with you right away. These are totally free discussions. There's no commitments to work with these folks or anything like that. It's just a service they offer to help as many people as possible. All right, with that said, Melody, I can't thank you enough. Happy Thanksgiving this week. I hope you have a great time with your mom and with your family there. I will let you have the last word. Any parting bits of advice for this audience?
Yeah, I would just say it's a really crazy time out there, and it can be very easy to get swept up in it. But I think we just have to constantly sort of reevaluate what's important, and I hope that over the Thanksgiving holiday that folks realize that a lot of those algorithms out there are trying to divide us on purpose, and
Mm.
so maybe focus on reconciliation this holiday because you're going to need your family. And yes, you guys may have differences, but understand that those differences have been exacerbated by those algorithms and that you probably have a lot more in common than you think.
I literally right before we hopped on here, I was listening to an interview with Professor Scott Galloway, who has a lot of data about the pernicious impacts that digital media has been having on society in general, particularly younger people. But what you just said completely agrees with everything that he was saying here. And so maybe maybe our parting bits of advice for folks here is maybe just put the phones away for the day of Thanksgiving. Try to while you're gorging on good food, have a fast in terms of digital content and just focus on strengthening those times with your family. Because as you said, as we go through, tricky times, social resilience, having communities that we can depend on, particularly our family, is about the most valuable asset you can have in those times.
Absolutely. Here, here.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Melody. Always great to see you. Thanks so much for coming
Thank
on.
you. Thank you so much.
All right. And everybody else, happy Thanksgiving. And thanks so much for watching.
I have 4,000 on gold. I can't remember whether when we talked last time I was there, I had been at 3,400 and raised it sometime in last year. So I raised it to 4,000, and I think we've been consolidating since April in a sideways consolidation. We're very close to breaking out of that, and I think we're about to. I think we'll see it in September, and have another nice run, probably to 4,000 in the last 4 months of the year. Silver, I have a 75 target that I've had for a long time. I think gold can get to 20,000 by the early 2030s. And I say early 2030s. That does not mean 2030. It means could be 2032 or 3. I don't know.
Yeah.
But 20,000 for gold and 500 for silver.
Gold recently hit a record high of around $3,526 per ounce, buoyed by a weaker US dollar, inflation fears, and declining confidence in treasuries. Analysts from Goldman Sachs and Morgan expect gold to reach $4,000 by mid-2026. However, silver is the standout performer of 2025, up around 40 to 42% year-to-date. Optimism is growing that it may finally break a multi-year underperformance trend relative to gold. For silver, the near-term target is $75. While the long-term targets of $20,000 for gold and $500 for silver remain highly speculative, current trends and expert forecasts suggest gold may approach $4,000 in the near future, and silver could begin to make significant upward moves. The speaker, David Hunter, a famous personality in precious metals, believes Wall Street has been too skeptical of this rally, while retail investors have fared better. Strong corporate earnings, driven partly by AI, and an underlying weak economy point to lower interest rates ahead. He expects the 10-year yield could fall to 3% by year-end and eventually to 0% as his global recession or global bust unfolds. Contrary to the mainstream view, he sees both short and long-term rates moving down, supporting bonds and even corporate credit in the near term. Hunter views this as the final stage of a 43-year secular bull market that began in 1982, with the Dow then at 780 and potentially reaching 60,000 soon. Falling rates, strong earnings, and a weaker dollar could fuel a parabolic move higher as institutional investors finally capitulate and turn fully bullish. In Hunter's view, this capitulation will provide the momentum for a steep final run in the equities. Let's dive into the video for more insights. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for the latest updates.
I think what we're going to see, and it's starting to happen, as I've said for a long time, from basically 2022 up, from October 2022 bottom down at 3,500 on the S&P, and I don't remember where the Dow was, but from that point forward up until very recently, and even now, most of Wall Street was skeptical. Retail did better in April. They didn't fall for the head fake, and they stayed bullish and they bought generally. So a lot of retail got scared, but generally the retail did better. Institutions got bearish, and they've been skeptical of this market all the way up. They keep looking at valuations and thinking valuations are at peak levels and they can't go much higher, and et cetera. What we're seeing is obviously because of AI, but also other things, the companies have done a great job in an environment that wasn't that easy to keep pushing the earnings higher. And, I saw that. That was part of my thesis. I also think people are way too bearish on the bond market, on interest rates. And I think, in fact, I'm very bullish on bonds and think rates are going to go a lot lower. And that's different from, I think, the street. But ultimately, I do think the US's rates are headed lower, both on the short end and the long end. I am very much and have been consistently saying, though today's GDP, for example, came out with a revision upward, 3.3% on GDP for the second quarter, I still believe under the surface, we have an economy that's not doing that great. And we have an economy that's heading for recession. So that has kept me bullish on bonds. I'm not so worried about exactly when it turns or how much it turns initially or whatever. I do think you're going to see the 10-year go to 3%, maybe by the end of this year. It doesn't have to be by the end of this year, but maybe. And ultimately, next year is going to be a rough economy, in my opinion. I call it a global bust. And in that, I think you can see the 10-year all the way down to zero. So I'm contrary to say the least. But I am not in the camp. I know there are a lot of people that look at last fall and say, oh, the Fed can lower rates, can cut rates, but the long end is going to go up. And I know that's a big story around Wall Street. I don't believe that at all. I think you've seen, basically, I'm more focused on the 10-year because that's what loans get priced off of, mortgages get priced off of. But even the 30-year will ultimately fall. It may be stickier to come down initially, but ultimately, I think all rates across the curve are going to come down. And even the corporate bond market for at least a little while longer is going to do okay. That we're in the end game of a 43-year secular bull market. At one time, I thought it was going to be a 42-year, and it stretched out. But it started in August of 1982. And the Dow at that time was, I can remember because I was running money then, and I turned bullish in August of 1982 in a new place where I basically had a great run. And they fought me. They were not equity guys. They thought we were crazy to do what we did, but I had top percentile numbers for 5 years running. The Dow back then was 780, wow. 780. And I'm calling 60,000 for this year. And frankly, I get beat up, as you know, all the time about moving my time targets. I don't have a time target per se. I do. I'm not saying it can happen anytime, but whether it happens in October or November, December or January, I don't care. It's coming soon. And people say, oh, you've already pushed it out again. No, I haven't. I haven't changed anything. I still think it could happen, by October or November. But anyway, it's rates coming down and earnings going up, still holding firm. And very big part of this, and the dollar selling off, and a very big part of this is Wall Street moving from constantly looking for a top with one foot out the door to being all in. They're getting closer to capitulating here and saying, yeah, I got to get more bullish because this thing has legs. And that's going to be the fuel for what I think will be a very steep run. But in answer to your question of how you could go that far, that fast, it's a parabolic that I think comes at the end of such a long cycle.
David Hunter recalls his success in 1982 and draws a parallel to today, noting that when the Fed eases, bonds, equities, and metals typically all rise. Hunter expects a similar setup in the coming months but warns this cycle is unusual since it didn't start from a bear market trough. While many have fought the rally, Hunter believes the eventual top will come when everyone is fully bullish, at which point he'll turn contrarian, and quadrillions in derivatives turn a normal downturn into a severe global bust. On commodities, Hunter has been bearish on oil since 2022 and sees it possibly falling to $30 during the bust but then soaring to $500 by the early 2030s. Hunter argues massive money printing, $20 trillion in the US and up to $50 trillion globally, will drive huge demand for commodities to build new infrastructure, while supply growth remains constrained for years. This mismatch, Hunter says, ensures explosive price increases once demand outstrips limited supply.
I guess I cut my teeth in this. Like I said, my favorite time to remember was 1982 because I hit it right on a dime and had really top 1 percentile pension fund manager performance for 5 years running in a shop that I had to drag along kicking and screaming. So I remember that very well. It's also reminiscent of what you get at when you have the start of a Fed easing cycle, right? So when the Fed starts printing, what moves? Rates move down, so bond moves up, equities move up, and metals move up. And so that's what it's going to feel like, I think, in the next 3 or 4 months. The thing is, we're not starting from a trough.
Sure.
We didn't go through a bear market. So that's what's unusual, and I think that's where people are going to probably get it wrong. Is they fought this all the way up. I keep saying that at the top, what you'll see is everybody will be all in and tell you this thing has years to run, at least a couple of years to run, and I'll be at that point contrary and saying no, this is the top. We're close to the top. And I think we will actually see CPI negative, PPI negative, even PCE negative, and it comes. My reasoning is pretty simple. It's number one, we're highly leveraged. The reason I call for a global bust is because we're so far beyond even 2008-9 in terms of leverage on the system, both debt, as I keep quoting, 330 trillion in global debt, and I realize a lot of it's sovereign, but 330 trillion in global debt, and quadrillions in notional value of derivatives. Never been here before, never. And derivatives are leverage on markets, debt is leverage on the system. Never been here before. I mean, this is so far beyond anything we've charted in our past. That'll turn a normal downturn into something far worse, I think. And so, and obviously a financial crisis if leverage starts unwinding. So that's how I get to a global bust. I de-bear on oil since 2022, and correctly so. I turned bearish on oil before. We had the spike up during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but I stayed with it at 130 and said we're going back to 85. And then once we broke 100, I said we're going to 60. So I've been pretty bearish on oil. I think we see probably 30 in the bust. And then from there, and it could certainly go lower given what happened last cycle, if you remember when it went to negative.
Who knew?
But I'll say 30. And from there, I think you could see $500 oil by the early 2030s.
Wow.
So again, as I say, it's a commodity cycle. Copper could be 20 or more. It could fall to $1 or $2 in the bust, but go from there to 20. Natural gas might be $50. I mean, I don't know where these things are going to go. What we're going to have is massive demand for commodities because they're going to be needed for building new plants and equipment and all that. Because of that 20 trillion print and probably 50 trillion worldwide, it's gonna goose demand, and we've rationalized down supply, the mining and all that, and search for oil, et cetera. We've rationalized that all down in a period when they were trying to discourage all of that. So if we get that through the roof, like I said, the demand because of the money print can happen within 1, 2, 3 years, whereas the having to build new supply can take 10 or 20 years. So you're going to have a case where you have supply far exceeding demand, and the only thing that can give is price.
David Hunter envisions an extraordinary but volatile path ahead. First, a deflationary global bust, then an unprecedented boom fueled by massive money printing, collapsing interest rates, and surging demand for commodities. While his bold forecasts for gold, silver, equities, and energy markets remain controversial, they highlight the risks of extreme leverage and the potential for historic shifts in global markets. Do you think Hunter's prediction of a global bust, followed by explosive commodity inflation, is realistic or overly extreme? If gold and silver do reach his long-term targets, how might this reshape global financial markets and currencies? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more updates. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Clearly in Asia, particularly in China, they view it as money. And of course, the BRICS, and that's one of my biggest bullish factors for gold, is I saw the de-dollarization and countries moving away from the United States economically and from their currency as bullish for gold. So that would argue that I still think it has to go a lot higher over time, but I think a reasonable target of 4,000. I think it's been accumulated. It's still probably 12 to 24 months away before they officially come out and say, okay, this is how we're going to trade among ourselves. And part of that is going to be gold. People who are going to talk about, oh, the Hunt brothers and once went to 50, well, to get back to that, you're right. It's almost going to have to trade at 200 for inflation. So what I have said, and it probably throws me into the silver bug camps completely, is that triple-digit price of silver is a legitimate target.
In Asia, especially China, gold is still seen as real money, and that perspective is spreading among BRICS nations as they move away from reliance on the US dollar, a trend that strongly supports higher gold prices. China's central bank continues buying gold. In August 2025, it purchased about 2 tons. BRICS nations are developing alternatives to dollar-based financial infrastructure, including digital payment systems and local currency trade. Gold is increasingly seen as a neutral reserve asset among these countries. Given these shifts, a long-term target of $4,000 for gold looks reasonable. Silver also has enormous potential. Adjusted for inflation, its 1980 peak near $50 would be closer to $200 today, making triple-digit silver a realistic and justified goal. Peter Grandich, a veteran market analyst and financial commentator, recalls that back in the 1970s and early 80s, few believed the Dow could ever reach 3,600, let alone 36,000, but history proved otherwise, just as today many doubt gold's ability to climb much higher. The reality is that fundamentals for gold have never been stronger. De-dollarization is accelerating across Asia and the global south, with central banks and retail investors boosting gold purchases and trade in local currencies rising. BRICS nations are building alternatives to dollar-based systems, and gold is increasingly viewed as a neutral reserve asset. China continues steady gold accumulation, though its reserves remain low compared to its economic size, leaving room for much more buying. Analysts expect this sustained demand to lift gold's floor higher, with BRICS discussions of gold-linked trade further supporting long-term price growth. BRICS nations are exploring dollar-free trade, with gold discussed as a potential benchmark or backing asset, though no unified gold-backed currency exists yet. Rising central bank demand, especially in Asia, is lifting gold's price floor, while silver also shows huge upside, with inflation-adjusted targets pointing to triple digits. As we start the video, don't forget to hit the bell icon and subscribe so you don't miss any updates. Please give us a thumbs up and leave a comment below if you enjoyed the article. We value your opinions.
For 13 years, the Dow only traded between 700 and 1,000. In fact, the very famous Business Week front page said equities are dead. Wall Street was extremely bearish. And an unknown young man came out of Gainesville, Georgia, named Robert Prechter Jr., with a philosophy and a technical analysis no one really knew of, Elliott wave theory, and said the Dow's going to 3,600. And they just prosecuted him to call him every name in the book. And then when the market took off, he became popular, and then he made a call about the crash in 87 along with me. And the perception was, how could it possibly go to 3,600, let alone a few decades later, 36,000 and more? So that same feeling's in gold right now. People, especially people that have been bullish and profiting from it, this 36, this is way out of line. Yeah, it's great. It give you all the reason, but how could it go a lot higher? It's not possible. You have to take that same philosophy. There's no reason it can't. In fact, I would argue it's not cheap anymore. Someone that was buying it at 1,300, seeing the tripling. But the fundamental argument for gold has never been better. We had at one time suppression by central banks who were offloading it. Now they're the biggest buyers. We had clearly not any society thinking it was money. Clearly in Asia, particularly in China, they view it as money. And of course the BRICS, and that's one of my biggest bullish factors for gold, is I saw the de-dollarization and countries moving away from the United States economically and from their currency as bullish for gold. So I think the more important way to answer your question is not talk about some of the general stuff or inflation or even against the stock market, is to admire how it's performed in an environment wasn't as conducive as it is now. So that would argue that I still think it has to go a lot higher over time, but I think a reasonable target of 4,000. And remember, when you're in all-time highs, other than a psychological number, there's no real resistance. So, pick 4,000. Yeah, that'll be a round number and so forth. And, Wall Street has treated gold like kryptonite. I think 0.5% of portfolios are assumed to have some exposure to gold. Can you imagine if people just went to 1 or 2%? It's still a very, very viable market for the long term. Well, I think it's going to play a significant role in the BRICS. They have not acquired all of this gold as a trade or a personal investment. They certainly can't flip it to someone that's going to pay even more so they profit from it. I think it's been accumulated. It's still probably 12 to 24 months away before they officially come out and say, okay, this is how we're going to trade among ourselves. And part of that is going to be gold. I don't think there's a worldwide situation coming anytime soon, because I think things have to get a lot worse before people realize how messed up we been with fiat currencies. I do still think that one of the ways that they're only going to be able to sell treasury bonds, especially long dated ones, a year from now, because I'm a big believer that short rates can fall, but long rates are only going to go higher. I think that's going to find a way that the Trump administration could reprice its gold that it owns to whatever the current price is, and also introduce longer term 40 or 50-year bonds with some sort of gold backing in order to get people to buy it. I think that's going to be how difficult it's going to come for the United States to fund itself, while other world bond markets, as we speak, are imploding as well. 180, and it was profitable to treat it as the second-class citizen to gold. But earlier this year, when it dipped under 30, when I looked at the fundamental argument, it was never stronger in the 41 years I've been involved. So I became a silver bug. And I also said it probably would lead gold for quite some time to come. And I think that's happening here. I think you make an excellent observation. People who are going to talk about, the Hunt brothers and once went to 50, well, to get back to that, you're right. It's almost going to have to trade at 200 for inflation. So what I have said, and it probably throws me into the silver bug camps completely, is that triple digit price of silver is a legitimate target. First of all, it's not that much more than a double from here. It sounds like a lot because for a lot of years it was single digits, low price. But I think it has every reason to continue to rise with gold. And the competition for it, the stock market, I have to throw this in. I made a big change a couple of weeks ago. I was not in the stock market crash camp. My January forecast for our clients was the stock market was going to be either side of unchanged. I told people to avoid U.S. equities, get into world funds. I love the Chinese market. But a couple of weeks ago, stuff just screamed that we were very vulnerable to a hard fall or even a crash. And that has been competition to gold and silver, and also cryptocurrencies. And so a lessening of the bull move or an actual decline, as long as it's not a total crash, could only aim the gold and silver. You know how I know that, Jesse? I left the metals and mining industry as a main place of business for myself in 2013. I dipped myself back in 5 years ago when I got very aggressive in gold and mining stocks and all. But I'm hearing from people in the last few weeks that I haven't heard from in 10 or 20 years. And saying, hey, I was looking up metals and I saw your name. I thought you left the business. And then, of course, the follow-up question is all the same. So what do you like? And I think we're just at that stage now where, other than that little audience that always confined ourselves to, we used to call ourselves the hard asset crowd. I don't think we say that anymore. It's being broadened out to generalists. And I think that's going to bode to help the metal prices higher.
Peter mentions that the mainstream U.S. financial media won't highlight gold and silver because of their ties to Wall Street. But once public demand grows, that will change. Major gold producers are already generating huge cash flow and could see much more interest as generalist investors notice their outperformance. The largest gold miners reported record free cash flows, revenues, and profits in Q2 2025. Margins are very strong. However, production has fallen for some majors. Juniors are expected to outperform seniors in this cycle due to high leverage and exposure in exploration and resource discovery. Established miners are expected to continue reporting strong cash flows, using capital for dividends, buybacks, and to shore up balance sheets. Despite strong gold price performance, analysts, including Peter, believe gold stocks are lagging and undervalued relative to gold itself. Analysts are watching for better leverage to gold, and many see additional upside as investor attention and valuations catch up. Let's dive into the interview.
Well, much of the mainstream financial media in the U.S. is tied to the hips of the financial service community. They're not going to write things go against it. They're advertisers, So I never expect them to write glowing stories about that, because gold and silver have been treated like kryptonite since I've been in the business by the financial service industry. And I don't expect that to change until the public overrides that demand and says, hey, listen, I'm listening, or I got this neighbor and they're killing it, and blah, yada, 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 yada. And so that's when I think the public will come to it. The mining stocks, even the expiration, and they're two different species, and I'll address them both. The mining stocks, as I said earlier, when I originally sold some of my physical gold in the beginning of the year at 3,500 to buy the major gold producers, which greatly outperformed the performance of the physical gold, they have many quarters ahead of just unbelievable, legitimate printing money through free cash flow. And what will happen for them and what will keep that sustained for them is, as we peter out in the stock market here, and we're seeing a lot of companies now not meeting the low-end earnings estimates so they can always say they beat them, these generalist money managers are going to hear about these mining companies. Look at Newmont Mining. Maybe today, as you and I record, depending on if Palantir gets hit enough and Newmont is rising, it's going to be the best performing stock in the S&P 500. Right now, it's number 2. And so that means it's outperforming 498 other general equity stocks. And yet, I would tell you that if we looked at people's portfolio, not half or 1% have Newmont Mining in it. So there's still so much upside demand for mining shares, and they should do well. But where I went to, and it's the most riskiest and speculative end of it, and remember, Wall Street created the word speculating, so don't really call it what it really is, and that's gambling, where you have to be mentally and financially prepared to lose part of all your capital. But the juniors is really where we're going to see a really bang for the buck. We're already seeing that in some incidents. And the reason is the world has not only shrunk to where companies can go and without too much risk and try to find the metals that are so critically needed now, everybody realizes, but the amount of money that has not gone into that industry to find these things. And remember, even if you hit it tomorrow, that you just went to a rock and drilled and it doesn't work that way, it takes several years of exploration and all. It's probably anywhere minimum, depending where in the world, 10 to 15 years before it comes out and pours the first metal and all. So when that recognition is realized by everybody and everybody realizes how we're scrambling, a gentleman made a good point to me the other day, and it was Sam Lee, it's actually the largest stock that I own, North Isle Copper and Gold. And he was just on a trade mission for Canada to South Korea and Japan. And he made a very good point is, even though they're world renowned for producing so much of the stuff we need, technology stuff, appliances and all of that, their entire base of metals that they need is from outside their country. They don't have any real own supply of their own. So here we have the world is scrambling for critical minerals and all. There's not been a lot of money put in them. I think that's going to make exploration companies become darlings for a period of time. And the majors, their currency is so strong now because of their stock, they're not going to try organic growth. They're just going to go out and buy, because we're still seeing good deposits selling for as little as $20 an ounce with gold at 3,600 and going higher. So to answer your question, I'm sorry for being long-winded, but I just think the mining shares and the exploration stocks, their day in the sun to where everybody's seeing it hasn't even arrived yet.
Metals and miners are poised for a solid next run higher, with fundamentals stronger than ever. Will the formalization of a gold-linked trade system by BRICS eventually hasten the move away from the US dollar? Is it possible that cheap mining stocks may eventually overtake gold's performance and produce disproportionate returns in the upcoming cycle? If you enjoy the content, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon for timely updates. We appreciate your support, and thank you for being with us.
China has bought much more gold than the official transactions tell you. They're not reporting all of their gold buying, and right now this weekend, in fact, at the SCO meeting, the Shanghai group, we had basically unification, which is incredible and very dangerous for the U.S. But India and China and Russia. Now they're the best friends after this meeting this weekend, and we always try to prevent them from putting an alliance together. What would happen right now, for example, if these three nations having 36% of the world's population say, we don't need to trade with the U.S. If they want to raise our tariffs to 25 or 50%, we don't have to trade with them at all.
At the 2025 SCO summit, India's Prime Minister Modi met with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, signaling warmer relations. China, Russia, and India strengthened ties in response to U.S. tariffs and Western pressure, presenting the SCO as a rising economic bloc independent of Western institutions. Together, these nations represent 36% of the world's population, giving their partnership significant economic weight. With China secretly stockpiling gold and reducing reliance on the dollar, this alliance highlights a global power shift and exposes U.S. vulnerabilities in trade and finance. A 49-year veteran market expert, Bert Doman, recalls that since 2007, market manipulation has become much easier due to the removal of the uptick rule, which had been in place since 1933 to prevent short-selling abuse. Its removal opened the door for high-frequency and algorithmic traders to heavily manipulate markets. Many believe the SEC protects investors, but in reality it often protects insiders who benefit from such moves. This makes rallies risky, as they can be engineered, and safer bets like gold and silver have offered better returns during uncertain times. Looking at history, gold peaked at $800 in 1980 before entering a 20-year bear market, just as cycle studies had predicted, Bert Doman says. The bottom came exactly in 2000, aligning perfectly with long-term trends. Analysts had already forecasted back in 1980 that after this cycle, gold would begin a powerful secular bull market. Unlike shorter cyclical swings, a secular trend is long-term, and the current rise in gold is part of that ongoing secular bull phase. As we play snippets from the video, kindly click the like button, subscribe to our channel, and enable the notification bell to receive fast alerts whenever we post a new video. I appreciate your support. Have fun watching the video.
No, with the manipulation today, it's easy to be wrong. For 48 years, we basically called most market tops within a day or two. Okay, and that is using advanced technical analysis. It's become tougher since 2007. In 2007, they made it possible for the high-frequency trading and the algo traders to sell short without waiting for an uptick. We had the uptick rule in place since 1933 with Joe Kennedy, who was a big manipulator in the 1929 crash. He and his guys crashed the market in 1929. And then they made him head of the SEC. And he said, well, if we would have had an uptick rule in place, we could not have manipulated the market downward. That means that if you put an order in to sell short, the order before that had to be on an uptick, a higher price, even if it's only at 1.8. And so that uptick rule was in place in 1933. And in 2007, they did away with it quietly. And we read it and said, oh, something is up. There's going to be a crash next year. And they want to make a big money out of that. And of course, we had the crash in 2008. So this was all manipulated. People have no idea. They think the SEC is there to protect them. No, the SEC is there to protect their friends. So a lot of money is being made with these manipulations, and so the up move in early April in the stock market, we said that it's going to be a bear market rally, but we'll probably have a couple of the indices making new highs by a small amount. But we don't want to play this. This is too dangerous because it doesn't necessarily have to happen that they will go as far as a few indices making new highs. So we sat that one out. Yes, we could have made a lot of money in that rally, but we had gold and silver and they made a lot of money for us. And then you asked about gold before. In 1980, gold had hit $800 an ounce. Okay, so we were along for the whole ride from 1977 onward. 77 is when I started my business, and so we were along for the ride. But then we got a sell signal on our indicators. We said, "Okay, time to sell, take profits." It's been fun, and then we did a cycle study on gold going back 400 years. So that was about 200 years in the US and 200 years we had to go to the data from Britain. And so we said, okay, this is going to be a 20-year bear market in gold. People thought that was crazy because everybody was still waiting for $3,000 gold at that time. But it happened. When was the bottom of that bear market? Year 2000, exactly 20 years after 1980, and it was amazing to us even because usually cycles they move a little bit to the left or to the right. They're off by a few years and so on. But the bottom was in the year 2000, and people want to know what the second part of the cycle study said is how far the next up move would be. So far, it's correct. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we said in 1980 how high this market would rise, the current bull market. It's a secular bull market. You always have to differentiate between a cyclical bull and bear market and a secular. Secular is very long term. Yeah.
Bert Doman point out that in the first phase of a market crash, investors facing margin calls sell whatever they can, including gold and silver, causing their prices to drop temporarily. But once that urgent selling is over, gold and silver rebound strongly as people seek safety while central banks print more money, eroding its value. That's when these metals shine as the only true protection of wealth. At the same time, India's warming ties with China and Russia at the SCO summit mark a shift toward a multipolar world, as the three nations, representing over a third of the global population, find common ground against Western dominance. Analysts warn that U.S. tariffs, especially on India, may be backfiring by driving these countries closer together. If they retaliate with tariffs or reduce trade, U.S. supply chains and retail sectors could face major disruptions, underscoring America's vulnerability in this shifting global balance. Now, let's recall the interview.
See, in the first part of a bear market, when the markets just tumble, and everybody has to scramble because they're getting margin calls. So they sell what they can't sell. And gold and silver, of course, it does have bids, and then they will sell that too. And in the first phase of a decline like that, gold and silver will get declined because it's being used as a source of cash. To meet margin calls. But then comes the second phase, and that is when all that is, urgent selling is out of the way, and that is when you really want to buy gold and silver. That second phase, because then everybody goes to safety, and gold and silver is considered the only safe thing, because the central banks then will step on the accelerator, manufacture as much money as they can, as they did in year 2020, 2020, 21. And that means that your money is worth less. The purchasing power of your money declines, and the only safety for that is gold, silver. They will go up. So gold and silver, gold has been an island of safety for thousands of years. It's not going to change. I think they know what's going to happen, what is inevitable. China has bought much more gold than the official transactions tell you. They're not reporting out of their gold buying, and so right now this weekend, in fact, at the SCO meeting, the Shanghai group, we had basically unification, which is incredible and very dangerous for the U.S. But India and China and Russia. Now they're the best friends after this meeting this weekend, and we always try to prevent them from putting an alliance together. Now they are the best friends. Now this is together. These three countries have 36% of the world's population. That is a big amount, 36%. Do you know what the U.S. is? U.S. is 4.1% of the world's population. And this is where Mr. Trump is so wrong. He thinks that everybody needs the U.S. consumer. Okay? He's wrong. What would happen right now, for example, if these three nations having 36% of the world's population say, we don't need to trade with the U.S. If they want to raise our tariffs to 25 or 50%, we don't have to trade with them at all. We don't need their consumers. We've got enough consumers outside of the United States. And in fact, we don't even have to do anything more. We don't even have to supply them with our stuff. We're just not going to even sell to the United States. Can you imagine if these three nations suddenly decide not to sell their stuff to the U.S.? The shelves at Costco and Walmart, etc., Target, they're going to be bare. Because you take a look at all the merchandise you see on those shelves, turn them upside down and see where they're made. They're made in these three countries, most of them. So I think we are much more vulnerable to them boycotting the U.S. than us boycotting them.
Both Bert Dohman's market insights and the geopolitical shifts seen at the 2025 SCO summit point to a world entering a new phase of financial and strategic realignment. As gold and silver continue to prove their long-term resilience, the strengthening alliance between China, Russia, and India adds another layer of pressure on U.S. dominance. These converging trends suggest that investors and policymakers alike must prepare for an era of heightened uncertainty and rapid change. Could the growing China, Russia, India alliance accelerate the decline of U.S. financial influence? Will gold and silver remain the most reliable safe havens as global markets face manipulation and geopolitical upheaval? If you like the analysis, then share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If you found this helpful video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. Thanks for being a part of our journey.